Developing nations face a hidden health crisis. Hundreds of millions of people are being debilitated by mental illness. The social and economic costs are staggering, yet most people suffer in silence, shunned by their communities with little hope of treatment. We've been to investigate this global health failure and meet some of the pioneers trying to bring mental illness out of the shadows.
Shubham Kittukale is lucky to be alive. A farmer in India's rural Vidarbha region, he was in serious mental distress when his farm fell into financial trouble.
आणि सकाळपासून म्हणजे तो दिवस असा होता की आज आपल्याला करायचं म्हणजे काय एक तर पैसा द्यायचा आहे वापसायला मग आपण जीवनातून निघून जायचं.
He grabbed a bottle of pesticide from his farm and he took it to a nearby bus station.
इथं घेतलं होतं. हेच जागा आहे ती इकडून असं आलं होतं. इथं घेतलेलं आहे.
An average of 15 farmers killed themselves every day in India last year. Economic and social pressures, along with almost no mental health infrastructure, has become a deadly mix. But the suicide epidemic here is just a symptom of a much larger global mental health crisis. Close to 500 million people are currently suffering from mental illness around the world. That's more than AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis combined.
It's one of those great mysteries in my mind, and I think in the mind of everyone who works in global mental health. Why don't people care?
That there are nearly 4 to 5.
Vikram Patel is a psychiatrist. Many consider the world's leading expert on global mental health.
Now, the vast majority of these affected individuals do not receive the care that we know can transform their lives.
He was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential thinkers this year.
Mental health is a fundamental right for all people, just as health is a fundamental right, and mental health is an integral part of health.
While mental disorders impact people around the world, they disproportionately affect poor people in developing countries, where governments spend very little on mental health care. Coping with these immense mental health needs demands new approaches, like the one Patel's organization, Vishram, helped to set up to combat suicides in India.
The problem with addressing the burden of mental health problems in India are the great paucity and the maldistribution of mental health resources in the country.
Like most developing countries, India spends less than 1% of its medical budget on mental health care. So Dr. Patel needed to make the most of the scarce resources. One of his first steps was to raise awareness using tools like these murals.
You can see a farmer, he's holding a bottle of poison, and these thought bubbles capture the sorts of common concerns that people have in this community. The costs that I'm going to bear because I have to get my daughter married. This one refers to the fact that I have a debt that I have to repay.
Since this rural community has no psychiatrists and few social workers, Dr. Patel decided to rely on community members.
If you could train ordinary people in the community to deliver babies safely, to support people with HIV/AIDS, surely you could do the same for mental health care.
One of the people trained to provide psychological first aid was Janrao Haware, who lives in the community and speaks the local dialect. A couple of weeks after Shubham attempted suicide, he had his first meeting with Janrao.
जेव्हा मी शुभमला पहिल्यांदा भेटलो म्हणजे तो दवाखान्यातून आला होता तर त्यावेळेस त्याच्या चेहऱ्यावर नाराज म्हणजे तो उदास होता एकदम नाराज होता.
Together they went through Shubham's story, his struggle with debt, and the feelings that drove him to attempt suicide.
आणि मी तुमचं सगळं जाणून घेणार आहे त्रास कशामुळे झाला काय झाला आणि पुढे भविष्यात असं होऊ नये यासाठी म्हटलं आपण दोघं मिळून प्रयत्न करणार आहोत.
Last year, Shubham's crop got washed out by a flood, and he faced financial ruin again. But this time, he didn't contemplate suicide. Shubham says Janrao saved his life.
त्यांचा आभारी आहे मी.
जांजराव नसतं तर अशाच घटना चालू राहिल्या असत्या. जांजराव जेव्हापासून आमच्या गावामध्ये येत आहे,
This kind of work has never been encountered before. It's extremely important to bear that in mind.
उनका जो प्रोसीजर है वो सब बता दिया.
Shubham and his family are now willing to talk about suicide and about mental illness.
To me, that's transformative to see the father speak so openly about Shubham's mental health problem, given the context where, of course, this is a very stigmatized and hidden condition in most of rural India.
The Vishram program is now expanding to 30 new villages with the help of private funding.
Today, when I go to the same villages, there is a complete expansion of people's understanding of what.
Despite its success, the program isn't sustainable on its own.
There's some disjunction between the amount of money the government wants to put in and the interventions that we know will achieve that goal.
Speaking to a medical consultant to the government at Vishram's advisory meeting, Dr. Patel said the government has the wrong approach and needs to focus on the mental health causes of suicide.
Can we use some of these resources towards at least addressing the health determinants of suicide, just a fraction?
The government recently announced it will take Dr. Patel's advice and launch a program of their own based on his model. But they are still spending far more on another program that provides money to families of farmers who have already killed themselves.
I think it's absurd to give money. It's almost like an incentive. Facing this economic catastrophe, you have this carrot that you can see, which is that, hey, if you kill yourself, your family will get this money. I just think it's such a tragic public response to such a huge public health problem.
There's also a huge public mental health problem in India's cities, where people in desperate need of help are isolated and hidden. Bhargavi Devar is a prominent mental health activist. She runs an outreach program in the slums of Pune. Her organization, Bapu Trust, relies on community workers going door to door.
You've seen the way people live in the slums, right? You just knock on people's doors and say, do you have somebody who hears voices?
When Bapu Trust workers found Munda, she'd been suffering abuse on the streets and at home based on her mental disability.
She was speechless when she came. We didn't know who she was, where she was from, who her family was, where she lived.
Devar and her team use art and music therapy to help Munda and communicate with her.
ड्रमिंग से हियरिंग वॉइस जो रहते हैं, जो भी आवाज़ें आती है, भास होता है लोगों को कि असेंबली क्लाइंट्स ऐसा कहते हैं कि बहुत सारे आवाज़ एक ही बार आते हैं, सुनाई देते हैं, वो बुलाते हैं, कुछ बोलते हैं, ऐसा जो कहते हैं, जब ड्रमिंग होता है तो उसमें एक साउंड होता है.
Bapu Trust also recruited community members for Munda's protection. This tea vendor keeps an eye on her and offers Munda free breakfast every morning.
There are people in the community who are walking or wandering, and yet they are not lost as such. Somebody is watching over them, somebody gives them chai, somebody gives them something to eat.
By using resources that are readily available in the community, Bapu Trust can treat roughly 200 clients for about $100 per person per year, a small fraction of what it would cost to treat them through hospitals and clinics. The organization gets no financial support from the government. It relies on donations from private donors and grants to cover its costs.
The Bapu Trust program in Pune is actually one of the rare innovations that has tried to implement a community health worker program for mental health in an urban area, and particularly in an urban slum area. In my mind, this is the classic model for community-based mental health care that we would like to see across the country.
If Munda hadn't been offered community-based care, she might well have ended up in one of India's institutions for the mentally ill. Most are overcrowded with dismal conditions.
I have seen a room, maybe no bigger than my living room, where there must have been, I lost count, but maybe 30 or 40 women. The room had bars, it looked like a prison cell. And this is why I fundamentally do not believe in the role of large institutions in mental health care. You're effectively robbed of any identity, autonomy, agency, and dignity. That's not care.
A recent report from Human Rights Watch details widespread abuse in many of India's mental institutions. The government has not yet formally responded.
One institution we visited had a capacity of 350, but was housing 900 people. You have to literally step over people entering the institution. That's how overcrowded they are.
Kriti Sharma, a researcher with Human Rights Watch, investigated how women are treated in 24 mental hospitals in India.
Institution after institution that I visited, women would come running up to me and say, "Send me home. Get me out of here."
Abandonment of people with mental illness into appalling conditions is rampant throughout the developing world. Human Rights Watch found that some of the worst abuses are in Africa. Gregoire Ongbenong is a mental health advocate in West Africa.
Bonjour.
He regularly visits crude shelters for people in need of psychiatric care.
Il faut dire que chez nous en Afrique, les malades mentaux sont les oubliés des oubliés. Moi, c'est Grégoire. Ils sont réduits comme des ordures, comme des déchets humains au milieu de la société. Ils sont considérés comme des gens qui sont possédés par le diable. Ils sont considérés comme des gens qui sont possédés, frappés par la sorcellerie.
Desperate families bring relatives suffering from mental illness to prayer camps like this one in Togo for spiritual healing. The vast majority of the population in this part of Africa views mental illness through the lens of tradition and religion. But tucked away behind the church, a dark reality for those suffering from mental illness. "153 people in need of care, chained to trees. They'll stay here, sleeping out in the open, with almost no food, for weeks, for months, even years."
Maintenant que tu es venu, bonne arrivée.
Merci, ma grande poupée.
Ça va,
Tu es belle, tu sais.
Oui.
Comment tu t'appelles?
Victorine.
Victorine.
Oui. Je n'étais pas malade et je ne suis pas fou.
With only 4 working psychiatrists in the entire country and almost no medication to treat mental illness, pastors like Paul Namanve, who runs this prayer camp, struggle to cope with those in need.
Comme un trouble mentaux, on n'a qu'à venir chez nous et on va prier pour eux. Par la grâce de Dieu, il va trouver la guérison. Oui, c'est ça. À chaque fois, on prie une fois dans la journée pour les malades. Donc, si on prie et on voit que la personne a commencé à bien parler, on a senti qu'il est en train de trouver la guérison.
Until then, he says, these patients have to stay chained to protect themselves and others around them.
I mean, to be honest, I get gooseflesh when I see these images. They're pretty horrifying.
Dr. Patel says what's going on in Togo is far too common.
What if these individuals were treated like this because they had HIV or TB? What would be the reaction of the community, the world? I'm pretty sure it wouldn't be this. I think the most important thing at the moment for me is to ensure that no one with mental illness is ever chained again.
Ongbenong says that his community-based organization, Saint-Camille des Lili, has been able to bring the practice to an end in his country, neighboring Benin.
Quand on a commencé, au vu des résultats, les familles eux-mêmes vont déchaîner, vont prendre leurs malades pour envoyer là. Donc aujourd'hui, il n'y a plus de centre de prière, il n'y a plus de malades enchaînés là. C'est fini.
Ongbenong used to run a tire repair business, but in the 1980s, it went under, and he fell into depression.
J'ai tellement perdu que j'ai failli me suicider. Moins un. J'ai commencé à mener une vie très, très misérable.
When he recovered, he realized he could improve conditions for others who were also suffering. Today, a network of clinics he founded operates in Benin, Côte d'Ivoire, and in Burkina Faso. The centers in Benin see close to 300 patients every month. Some of them, like this man named John, are brought in off the street.
John, vous l'avez vu hier, il a fait déjà des nuits, des jours sans jamais connaître l'eau, sans jamais se laver. Ce sont des gens qui vont même boire l'eau des rues, l'eau dans les caniveaux.
The staff helped him clean up and brought him fresh clothes. He also received routine medical tests and psychiatric assessment. After diagnosis, patients are given regular doses of medication at a reduced cost. Funding for the organization comes primarily from private donors in Canada and Europe.
Il faut vous dire, chez nous, en Afrique en général, même ici au Bénin, c'est pareil. Vous êtes malade, vous allez à l'hôpital, vous n'avez pas d'argent, on ne vous soigne pas, on ne vous traite pas.
Clients also learn practical skills they can use to make a living. Raymond Madou set up this bakery after he began taking medication for his bipolar disorder. He now runs it with others in treatment.
Le travail libère l'homme. Sans le travail, l'homme n'est rien. Si les autres aussi ils trouvent du travail à faire, ils auront aussi la joie de vivre, comme moi.
When people ask me, but what can we do? What can we do in poor countries? I say, well, here's the model. It exists. They've been able to transform the lives of so many individuals with such little resources.
The need for community-based care is crucial, not only for treating psychiatric illness, but also the mental health effects of trauma.
The mental health consequences of trauma have been recognized for more than a century. The experience of a terrifying incident has effects on the human brain and one's mental health, irrespective of the cause of the terror.
Conflict in the world today has resulted in more than 19 million refugees, the highest number since the Second World War. The flood of people from the Middle East into Europe points to the enormous mental health stress that war and dislocation place on adults and children. In Middle Eastern camps for refugees fleeing the war in Syria, people are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. Ali Samara's daughter died in Syria when an airstrike hit their home.
يعني مثل ونفرض هسه قاعدين نحن بامان ما بشوف غير القذائف الصبي هون اتصابت وخوفها رعفها يعني صار يقدر بتحضرك خايف من القصف الدمار هالشغلات داية.
Ali's surviving daughter was right next to her sister.
عرفني هيك يعني بس شفت اختي مقتولة اول شيء كنا هاتين يعني بس لما شفت اختي مقتولة هيك صرت عصبية كثير يعني هسه انا شوي عصبية ما بقدر يعني اذا واحد حكاني دغري بطلع.
شو بدي اقول لك يعني لولا الله ما اجينا لهون على الاردن طبعا بقيه الاطفال بسوريا يعني حس مرضان نفسيا.
It's hard to imagine, what kind of emotions must go through a child's mind in those seconds, those minutes, which must seem like years, when you have had this absolutely unexpected, terrifying incident fall upon you. My sense is what's very important is to understand what happens immediately afterwards.
That's what Dr. Mohammed Abu Halal is dedicating his life to. He works in Jordan's Zahari refugee camp, the second largest camp in the world, where there are few resources to help traumatized refugees. So Abu Hilal, a Syrian psychiatrist, has taken it upon himself to fill the void, working under the radar since he's not licensed to practice in Jordan, using what little resources he can scrounge together. He's trying to address the deep psychological wounds of the Syrian children here.
This generation are the future of Syria. If you don't help them to cope, to get the needed skills to deal with this situation, there will be a future a problem.
فاحنا نزلنا على تحت عشان نطلع من المدرسة فبلش القناص يضرب على الأطفال. أنا طلعت يعني أول ما إجينا بدنا نطلع القناص ضرب طلقة هي كانت على ما أظن علينا بس إجت طفل وأخته توفت.
14-year-old Ahmed didn't speak for days after he saw his classmate killed. He would hide under the table when he heard loud noises, clear signs of trauma.
وليت مكتئب ما قدرت أكل. صار في تغير كثير من النوم والأكل والراحة النفسية.
يعني تحدد حالك بداية وهيك. أصير عصبي أكيد صرت عصبي
تقريبا صرت أعصب كثير يعني.
Without treatment, you will have aggressive behavior, you will have problem in schools, you will have children who will, adolescents who will take drugs and forming gangs, and also just having disrupt social life.
In addition to one-on-one counseling, Abu Hilal is using art therapy to try to help Ahmed and the other children.
الوالدة طلع من البيت ما يلعبوا، من يجي الطيارة وضربت عليهم صواريخ.
شو صار لهم؟
الوالدة نشيل فاف وردوا راحوا.
So in PTSD you have nightmares. So one technique to combat this nightmares is to draw them. Like here the helicopter that used to bomb now is sending balloons. So this airplane is sending fruits.
That's a great example of how you normalize the lives of these children by engaging them in the sorts of things they would have done had there not been trauma. This is precisely what we need to be doing in the aftermath of trauma, is normalizing life as much as we possibly can.
Helping the children is also a way for Abu Hilal to deal with the trauma of his own experiences of imprisonment and torture in Syria.
Actually, it's a very terrible experience to be arrested in these circumstances. And you, from philosophical and psychological point of view, you hit the bottom of all life.
After close to 2 months in prison, he was released. He fled to Jordan with his wife and 3 children.
I have a new life, and I have a duty to do it, as if I am dead, but I was granted a new life.
He's passing on that optimism. Abu Hilal calls his organization Bright Future. And the efforts seem to be paying off for children like Ahmed, who's starting to do better in school.
بس بعد هالكوابيس تيجي لي بس طريقة خفيفة يعني مثل ما كانت تيجي زمان. كل شيء خف حتى الاكتئاب النفسي.
I hope that this will give a hope and model for many areas in the world. That you can do something even if you are in a very hard situation. Syrian-Jordanian border.
Because of his success in Jordan, Abu Hilal is now expanding his efforts to a Syrian refugee camp in Turkey. But Bright Future still operates on a limited budget, supported entirely by the NGO Doctors of the World.
All what we did, maybe we covered like 10,000, 20,000 child, but there's millions out there waiting for this help.
Meanwhile, the bombs keep dropping in Syria, and traumatized refugees keep fleeing to unknown futures.
People who should be moved into action, whether it's policymakers, development agencies, funders, somehow aren't really moved to action.
In fact, at the United Nations this year, for the first time, governments included mental health as part of their new Sustainable Development Goals. Other global institutions, including the World Bank and World Health Organization, have acknowledged the need to make mental health a central focus of the global health agenda.
I'm looking forward to the day when policymakers and funders begin to fund the sorts of programs that address stigma, improving access to appropriate evidence-based care that can demonstrate to communities that recovery is a reality.
For now, in places like India, West Africa, and the Middle East, it's left to a vanguard of humane innovators who are trying to bring actual care to people, hoping governments will eventually get behind their work.
I think all 3 stories are actually telling the same message of hope. We can do something, and we can do it now, and we can do it at a low cost. That's revolutionary.